Good morning, everyone, and welcome to yet again another series on shaping sustainable cities. And today we're going to talk about a concept that has been receiving a lot of buzz throughout the past years. But what we're going to try to do today is to make it more accessible and to give a concrete example of how it works. And that is the concept of smart cities. This has been something you've probably heard here and there, but we're going to make it a lot more accessible. And luckily, we have a clear-cut example. And this comes from Amsterdam Smart City. And we're going to see maybe how we can take some inspiration from their ideas, learn from their experience, and probably apply the same concept in our city. Wherever you're tuning in, please leave us a comment and let us know from what city you are listening us from, and prepare your questions, because as we develop the conversation, I'm hoping there are going to be some brainstorms, and maybe you would like to address a question in the comments, so please feel free to do so. Like I said, Shaping Sustainable Cities is a series that we are doing in partnership with the Dutch Embassy here in Romania. And the main objective is to share our experiences and our good case practices so that together we all build shape sustainable cities. At the end of the day, it's not a competition. It doesn't matter if just one city gets there. It's important for all of us to get there. Today, I'm very proud and happy to have Cornelia Dinca as our guest. And allow me to tell you a little bit about Cornelia and her resume and why she is the person to talk about this subject. Cornelia is the International Liaison for Amsterdam Smart City, the innovation platform which brings together governments, companies, knowledge institutions, and civil society organizations to work on a future-proof Amsterdam Metropolitan Region. She is responsible for connecting international stakeholders to the smart city ecosystem, facilitate knowledge transfer, and help kickstart new collaborations. She's also the founder of Sustainable Amsterdam, a consultancy focused on transferring the Amsterdam-based best practices for sustainable and smart cities internationally through experiential learning. So if you have people here tuning in that want to really apply these concepts, please keep in touch with Cornelia, because she's an incredible resource. And there is a lot that I can go into when it comes to your resume, but a lot of it will also unfold as we bring in the conversation. So first and foremost, thank you, Cornelia, for tuning in. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. And we would like to start off first by talking about Amsterdam Smart City, because it's a beautiful and a great example for how a concept like this can be implemented. So tell us a bit more of how this project and program came to be, and a little bit of where it is right now since its funding.
Yeah, so the program started out in 2009, so we're 11 years old by now. And it actually came, you could say, in a sense, from the community or from the ecosystem. So it was started by two main parties, Alliander, which is the energy grid operator in Amsterdam and, well, a larger part of the Netherlands. And what was at the time called the Amsterdam Innovation Motor, which was an organization facilitating innovation through what we call triple helix collaboration. And basically, that's just a fancy term for bringing together governments, companies, and knowledge institutions. So the idea at the time was really to create a program to facilitate very concrete pilots focused on making people aware of their energy use and helping them reduce their energy use through digital technologies. So you could say that really the program started out with a focus on facilitating the energy transition by bringing together public and private stakeholders, but really with a focus on citizen engagement, which is really quite unusual for a party like a grid operator to do. Grid operators, they're kind of very traditional institutions. They don't even typically come very close or talk to their customers. Mm-hmm. So that was quite unusual at the time, let's say. And again, what was also quite unusual is that even though the city supported or facilitated the initiative, they weren't really the driver behind it. So it really came from other parties in a sense. So that's still very much the ethos of the program. 10 years later, we now have a broader perspective. So we don't work only on the energy transition, but we actually bring together public and private stakeholders and partners to work together on 4 societal transitions. So energy, but also mobility, circular economy, and digital city. Mm-hmm. And really, let's say the role nowadays is much more as an ecosystem facilitator. But what is still very much the basis is this conviction that you really need a variety of partners, public and private, but also big and small, working together on these complex societal challenges that no single party can really make impact on their own.
Mm-hmm. So it's beautiful that in the end, it started from a problem, a clear-cut idea that was pressuring many stakeholders, and that kind of brought people together. And in time, you've also expanded your horizons in terms of the subjects that you approach. Can you give us an idea of, for example, how the project is working now? Maybe tell us a bit more on some of the projects that lately have been taking place and how that has worked for. We're not going to get into the COVID discussion yet, but we will get that into later because we do have a small surprise close to the end.
Okay. Well, so the program nowadays really consists of two main pillars. So this public-private partnership, where we bring together almost 20 partners. So that includes governmental organizations like the City of Amsterdam, but other municipalities in the region and the provincial government, as well as companies, corporates, let's say. So larger engineering consultancies like Arcadis and Royal Haskoning that are quite large, let's say, in the Netherlands. Also knowledge institutions, and very important for us and quite unusual for smart city programs is that there's also some very strong representation from civil society organizations and bottom-up initiatives. So we bring together these partners on a regular basis. It's every 6 weeks. We put them in the same room. It used to be a physical room. Nowadays, because of COVID, it's a virtual room for the most part. And really, that's really the most important thing that we do is actually putting these parties together at the same table, which sounds really obvious, but it doesn't happen on its own. So it takes this constant work and constant facilitation to bring these parties together and to stimulate that they work together on these societal transitions. So we have a process for how to do that. And next to this public-private program, we also have this international community, and that's again our way of expanding our ecosystem beyond our partners. So we work in this ecosystem approach. That means that we don't only represent the interest of our partners, but also we facilitate that the broader ecosystem can connect to our partners, but also to other relevant stakeholders. And I can also maybe tell a little bit more, show a little bit about the platform as well. I don't know if you want to do that now or a little bit later.
No, yes, please. That's exactly what I wanted to lead into, because I first and foremost, what I appreciate is that it's not a closed loop system in the sense that, okay, it's just us here and we're great and we're smart and, everyone else let us be. You have this approach of including people from a wider ecosystem. So please, because this is a part that I'm hoping people that are tuning in can be excited about. There are a lot of great projects you can find there. And once again, whomever is tuning in, you can leave us your message and questions in the comments. We would love to know from which city you are tuning in. And please pass this on to whomever you know that is passionate about the subject so that we make this conversation very exciting.
So please. Alex, I'll just share my screen and do a small demo of our website, which is also our community platform. So I think you should be able to see the Amsterdam Smart City website now. So like I said, this is actually also our community. So you see also the top, join our community. There are now more than 8,000 community members. It's almost 9,000 community members. And I will try to explain a little bit what this means and what you can actually do when you come to this community. So on the homepage, if you click, for example, on updates, you see actually, in fact, this is a post by my colleagues that we are next week launching some, let's say, the next phase of our platform. So definitely follow up on that if you'd like to see kind of the next step into this development. But the important part here is that anyone can make these posts on this platform. So you see here a post about a project by the University of Applied Science. They work a lot on new technologies. You see here a post, actually this is a very interesting initiative from the Chief Technology Innovation Office, which if there are questions, I'm happy to explain more about. But this is an initiative to actually scale up initiatives in the city. So we have a lot of startups, and we've done quite a good job building the startup ecosystem, but we noticed that we still have a problem really scaling up solutions. So this is a new approach that's, let's say, brings together different governments to rethink their procurement process to make it easier for startups to do work for the government, but also to scale up their solutions. You see, there's different posts basically, and these posts are really coming from the community, and you can also select these posts by these different themes. So whether you're interested in mobility or governance and education, for example, or citizens and living, you can see all kinds of different updates. And everyone can like and everyone can comment on these updates, and everyone can, of course, post these updates. Similar, and that's again what we mean by being a platform. It's all about trying to matchmake between the demand and supply of ideas and resources. So again, this is a place where anyone can post their requests. So you see, for example, a student who's doing their thesis on sustainability and circularity, and is looking for somebody who can provide a project for that thesis, for example. But there's all kinds of requests. So looking for innovations that can help businesses in hospitality to manage occupancy and distancing, as an example, or somebody looking again. Somebody, I think this is a request from somebody in India who is looking for some best practices for their thesis. So all kinds of different requests. Here's actually somebody hiring a campaign manager within one of the energy cooperatives in the ecosystem. The Bubble Barrier, this is a startup actually, and they're looking to connect to the lessons learned from that initiative. So you see the requests, and then you also see that people are being tagged, and then they get an email, and that brings attention. Maybe this is something for you to look at. And this is one way, again, that we facilitate that these people can find each other. We don't want to be the bottleneck in this ecosystem. Most people come to the platform for the project. So that's the thing that I wanted to emphasize. So when you come to the project page, you see more than 300 projects are posted here. Some of these projects are by Amsterdam Smart City or our partners, but anyone from the ecosystem can add their project to the platform. So again, just to kind of give you an idea of how you can use the platform, if you select mobility, just as an example, I know also mobility is a hot topic in Bucharest and other Romanian cities, and it's also where a lot of my work focuses on. So you see this different projects, and for each one of these projects, you can click on it. You see some information. What is the goal? What are the results? Who initiated this project? And how can organizations get involved? You see the phase of this project. Is it an idea? Is it being implemented? Is it being evaluated? And then you can also click on the team, and then you see the people involved in this project. So you see the owner, and this helps you, again, if you're working on a similar project in your own city, then instead of always contacting us as a small team of 7 people at Amsterdam Smart City, we can help you connect and get to the right people, but we also want to make it easy that you actually connect to the right experts yourself. And this is one way that you can do it. So if there are questions from you, Alex, or also from the people joining us today on live stream, and they would like to hear about certain kinds of projects, then I'm happy to highlight a few of those. But maybe I'll just stop for now.
It is a pleasure to see how this community has been formed and how many interesting projects have been developed. And this is probably one of the things that whenever you think of an idea like this, there's the expectation that it has to be a centralized idea, that there has to be, someone that has to put everyone together. But at the end of the day, it's a very organical approach. You start with the ecosystem in mind, but in time, people join in. And I very much appreciate the fact that it's not just institutions and big companies, also students have the place to do research, and a lot of small innovations can be shared, which is incredibly necessary, especially when having to deal with a very quick on the spot crisis that we have to see. I see here from the categories. I was curious about the circular city, whether we have some interesting projects you can showcase from this concept, because it's also a conversation that has been taking place in cities like Bucharest, Timișoara, and maybe there's some we can take some inspiration from.
Yeah, sure. And actually, in circular city, we would almost need a separate podcast, I think, to really go in depth on this topic because it is a very hot topic in Amsterdam at the moment. Amsterdam is also actually the first donut city. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Kate Raworth and the idea of donut city. So it's really about bringing together the ambitions for a sustainable economy, but also an inclusive economy. So let's just say it's a very, very big topic in Amsterdam. Amsterdam also actually on a national level, there is an ambition to transition to a fully circular economy by 2050. This is another big ambition that's been, let's say, driving a lot of innovation related to circularity. But if I just maybe highlight a few projects, so I will mention Resilio. This is a project from University of Applied Sciences and a few other parties in the ecosystem. And it's all about making better use of rooftops in order to manage water. So water management is a very important topic in Amsterdam and the Netherlands in general, with so much of the city and the country being below sea level. It's always a continuous struggle of how do we keep our feet dry, so to say. And this is basically about smart blue-green roofs. And I'm not going to go into detail on it, but it is a nice example of a project. And again, it kind of shows how broad this idea of circularity can be. So actually, when we talk about circular cities, quite often the discussion starts with waste management and waste separation or recycling. But in Amsterdam, it's really quite a broad discussion that also includes, for example, renewable energy generation. It's also partially what I guess you could say similar to smart cities, because it's such a broad topic. It's an advantage, but also potentially a disadvantage, because everyone can kind of talk about different things within that framework. But besides that, maybe I'll highlight a few other examples. And let me just actually, if I go, and this is slightly different. So we have actually on the platform a different place that's fully dedicated to this kind of circular Amsterdam program or ecosystem. And again, the idea here was that in order to really facilitate the circular transition, the city government can set some of the direction and some of the goals, but it really needs the companies, small and big, and also, let's say, citizens, to really actually make this transition happen. So you see here some example of circular businesses or business models, different examples on that theme. But then you also see circular food and organic stream chains, circular construction chain, circular energy. So again, it's and governance and valorization. So you have different kinds of projects based on different dimensions of circularity. One of, I'm trying to think which one, just trying to choose a few examples. This virtual power plant, maybe I think is an example, which is not just, let's say, circularity, but also certainly smart energy. And in this project, this is basically a virtual power plant project. So what that means is that in this neighborhood in US, several homes, I think it was about 20 homes, were connected to so they got solar panels, or if you had solar panels, you were eligible for getting a home battery. And the home batteries were connected to each other into a microgrid, basically sharing that energy with each other. So this is all about how do we move to decentralized energy systems. This is a project that was completed. It was part of a larger EU-funded project called Citizen. So you see that actually this is now in the evaluation phase. And again, it's a good example where you see a lot of people involved in the project. And you also see, in this case, a lot of comments. So again, people just asking, okay, how does this work? Or how can I get involved? Or how can I set up a similar project in my own city? These kinds of questions.
What I think I can mention that is a thing that probably is on many people's minds is that usually when you think of a smart city, usually you start with, okay, the technology, like what technologies do we implement? But in the end, what your approach is, and I believe it's important to mention, is that you start very much from the ecosystem more than anything, because without the community, without the people that fully understand the issues that people are dealing with, both in an institutional and systemic level, as well as from their personal point of view, it's very hard to come up with just, okay, here's the technology, let's just copy paste it wherever we see it fit, right? So this is one important concept that at the same time does bring its own challenges, because like you said, there is a bit of a difficulty when you have this vibrant ecosystem of ideas and startups. When it comes to scaling, it's a bit challenging, right?
That's true, and also maybe to comment on this, because also internally we've had a lot of discussions over the years. How important is the technology part or the high tech part? Because indeed, smart cities is also a concept that comes out of the ICT sector, so to say. And certainly in the early phases of the program, I mentioned it was really about digitalization for the energy transition. But then when we started building this ecosystem or this community, we also had a lot of people wanting to share projects or ideas, which didn't necessarily involve a high tech or new flashy technology. So we were really confronted with this question: do we tell people, okay, you're enthusiastic about a project or an idea, but because there's no interest for a telecom, or because there's no blockchain, or because there's no high tech element to it, then that doesn't make it smart. So we thought, okay, if you're going to take this community approach, then you really have to actually listen to the community for what's smart. And that's a little bit the approach. So actually anyone can share their project on the platform. And it's not for us to say something is or isn't smart. If there's something completely inappropriate, then the community manager will flag that. But again, it's in this bottom-up approach, you have to be willing to accept that actually there is there's a variety of definitions and approaches for a smart city, and that kind of holistic and integrated approach is actually what's quite important to us ultimately.
And I believe, it's a great discussion point also for, hopefully, if we have people that are working in public administration, is that this concept is not something that they have to manage on their own. The beauty of what you're doing is that you're transmitting the idea, and this is kind of the concept in the Netherlands, is kind of a bit of the philosophy of decentralizing and making sure that you are not the only one in charge. And that implies opening up the system to having more people bring in inputs, putting resources available, and then seeing what derives from there. And you talked about the fact that there is a chief innovation officer, if I'm not mistaken, and to tell me a bit about that role inside the administration, so that people get an idea of how the administration in the Netherlands approaches this concept of ecosystem and smart cities.
Yeah, so I think to kind of make a distinction, because a lot of people think that Amsterdam Smart City, let's say, is that chief technology or chief innovation office, and that's not the case. So we are, as I like to explain it, as sort of the external motor, so external to the city government, that helps the city government and also the other partners innovate. But indeed, there is also a sort of internal motor within the city government that's called the Chief Technology Office Innovation Team, which is started out as a very small team with about 5 or 6 people about 6 years ago, and now it's grown to more than 80 people. And their mandate, they're really not really supposed to be doing any projects on their own. Their role is really actually to work with other departments within the city government to help them innovate and to help them enter, let's say, 21st century government, and so to say. And we work very closely with them. So the Chief Technology Officer, Ger Baron, he was actually the founder of Amsterdam Smart City 11 years ago. So he always kind of came from this, he really believed in this kind of bottom-up and multi-stakeholder collaboration. And he started with that actually from outside the city government, and then eventually also now for the past 7 years or so from inside the city government. But there is, I think, also previous to that, I mean, in the Netherlands, historically, there is a sort of culture that's very decentralized, very horizontal, very bottom up. I mean, there's just to kind of illustrate that point in a very simplistic way, water boards are the oldest institutions in the country, and they're older than the governments. And actually, water boards are a sort of bottom up, collaborative institution set up by people working together to maintain the dikes, to protect, let's say, the land. So that kind of gives you an idea of where this culture of decentralization comes from. But I also like to say that, you can't just say, oh, this is in our culture or this is in our history. You have to constantly work on keeping that culture alive. So Also within the city government, there's not everyone shares this view, but a lot of people really do believe that there are too many topics and too many challenges that the city government can't really address on its own. It really needs to be able to work with other parties in the city to actually, to play much more of a facilitator role, in fact. And that's maybe where I thought sharing this example of OpenStat, the participatory budgeting platform, I thought that's maybe another way to kind of illustrate that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please. This is a thing that I believe is a message for many of us, that I think in general we're all obsessed about me finding the idea of being the savior of the world, but at the end of the day, the real solution is just bringing the people, the smartest people in the room, and letting them find that solution. And I think it's an important message for many people in local administration, that they don't have to take that burden all on themselves. So let's see, because I also love this concept very much. You can tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, so basically this is a part of what's called Open City, and it's a participatory budgeting platform, and it's actually part of a larger mandate of the city government focused on democratization. So really citizen empowerment that goes beyond just showing some plans to the citizens and asking them what they think. I mean, there's still a lot of examples, even in the Netherlands, where that's basically what citizen participation means. Also because it's actually mandated, you have to do it. There's kind of a minimum requirement you have to meet. But this, I think, is a good example of how you can go beyond that. So what you see here is, so this on this map, you see different flags, and these are all ideas coming from the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So people are proposing different improvements to their streets or to their to their school areas, just all kinds of different suggestions. And you see in every case you have arguments for and arguments against. And in this case you have mostly arguments for, but there are many examples also where you have way more arguments against than arguments for. Oh, sorry, mm-hmm. I'm going to try and click again, something refreshed. And for every idea you see votes for, so in this case 254 votes for and only one vote against it. You need a minimum 100 likes in order for the idea to be then discussed by the district council. Mm-hmm. So this is really, again, it's not the city government that organizes this program per se, but it's on a district by district level. And then the district government gives a feedback on whether this is going to be implemented or whether it's going to be considered in the next phase of the project, where basically people get a code to vote up to a certain maximum budget. So I believe in the District of West, it's 200,000 euros that gets allocated in this way. So these are mostly small projects of worth 5 to 20,000 euros per project. But some districts mm-hmm. get a bigger budget depending, let's say, on different socioeconomic considerations. So the point here is that this, or one of the things that makes it, I think, quite special is that this platform was developed using open source code. And the advantage of using open source code is that you can very easily reuse it. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second because mm-hmm. I wanted to illustrate how this platform was then used as input to build a completely new platform when Corona happened. Let me see. I think I have to share screen again. Let's see. I think it should work now. So when you so via Amsterdam, this just means we Amsterdam, and like I said, this was mm-hmm. a platform launched in March, shortly after Corona hit. And you will notice it actually has a very similar look and feel. Again, you see the flags. Each one of these flags is a different initiative. You see in total there are 565 initiatives listed on the platform, also by different kinds of themes, so tech and online tools, but also sport or government or people helping each other in their neighborhood, or healthcare, all kinds of different themes. This is actually also an interesting one: loneliness and vulnerable people, which is of course a very big discussion in the city, how to support these vulnerable groups. And this is again an example where the city government was thinking, how can we respond to this crisis? And it knew that it wasn't really for the city to solve the crisis on its own. There was so much energy and so many ideas from the community, and it was really actually for the city government to basically give a platform. And that really also shows the resilience of the city, and it really shows again that sort of facilitating role of the city government, because the city government would never be able to come up with these 565 initiatives on its own. But once you have a platform, then you actually see how much is happening and how many solutions or how much support there really is from the community. And again, what made it possible to really build this platform very quickly is the fact that we had this open source code that we had developed previously, which could be very easily repurposed.
So in other words, a smart city is an open city and an open source city.
Yeah, and of course we also have a lot of discussions about this. The open source, can you use open source in all cases? And the answer is probably not. And that's also something the city government has been learning. When should we use open source and when should we not? Because some people are really, let's say, kind of extremist in their approach for open source. But certainly it has to be said from a smart city, a kind of standpoint. The issue of vendor lock-in is a very, very big challenge for many cities. So I'm sure this is also the case in Bucharest and many other Romanian cities, where you're most likely seeing within different administrations the use of certain dashboards or certain data platforms or all kinds of different systems where the government ends up depending on a certain provider and doesn't really have the possibility to make changes, or to even, in many cases, the city doesn't even own its own data, because that data stays with the developer or with the platform provider or the technology provider. So in Amsterdam, about 5 years ago, there was a big shift to start developing some in-house solutions, so moving much more towards open source solutions, precisely in order to be able to have control over the development and control over the data. And the nice thing about open source solutions is that those are also made available on GitHub, and it also means that other cities can use them.
Indeed, because to a certain extent, there are some certain solutions that are very customizable and require a bit of a local approach, but there's a lot that already can help other cities, knowing that, okay, we have a starting point, and from here we can work with whatever is necessary for our situation. I would like for us, before we go into I did receive one question at one point, but it was lost, and it was coming from Cluj about connecting non-small tech farmers. So if that person is still tuning in with us today, please write the comment again, because unfortunately it got lost, and I wouldn't want to warp the question. So please, and any other questions you might have, please write them now in the comments. I wanted to talk about another project or approach that I believe is of great inspiration for in Romania, but in most countries, if you ask me, is the startup residence concept, because it's something I found truly inspiring. And while it is at first it seems a bit scary for someone in the administration to do something like this, for all of us it just feels normal, because I believe in both Romania and many countries out there is already a critical mass of people that want to get involved, and it would be a pity not to use them as a resource. So tell us a bit more about this project.
Yeah, so maybe to give you some background or some context again, about 6 years ago, Amsterdam, the city government decided it wanted to position itself as a startup city. And this thinking actually started even earlier. It started in, after the last financial crisis, so 2008, 2009, when the city government realized that it was too dependent on large corporates, and that was not a very resilient economy. So how can we diversify to have also to really support smaller startups and smaller companies? That was, let's say, the question. And to get some inspiration, the city government traveled to Silicon Valley to see how they do it, to learn from the leading ecosystem for startups and innovation. And it came up with some inspiration, in fact. And that inspiration translated into the Startup in Residence program, where the city government defines challenges and it invites startups to solve them. So I'm going to share my screen again and see if I can show you a little bit about the program. Okay, so you should now see this bringing startups and governments together. Again, with this focus on specific challenges. And that's one lesson learned, is that you have to be very concrete with your challenges, and you need, as a city government, you really need to have challenge owners within the city government who are willing to take responsibility and say, I am the owner of this challenge and I want to work with a startup to solve it. If you don't have that, then it doesn't really work. That's what we've learned from the past 5 years of running this program. So in fact, the latest round just closed in Amsterdam, but I'll just show you a little bit of how this works. So you see here the different challenges that were open. So for example, on circularity at the arena, clean and green energy, clean municipal trucks, food from the hood. So maybe I'll just choose this because you mentioned there was a question about local food systems. Mm-hmm. So you see some background, the challenge. So what is actually the challenge? Find an innovative solution that brings local food producers closer to the Amsterdam consumers. What is the criteria that we're going to use in selecting the startups? And who is the owner? Which department? This is the spatial planning department that's the owner of this challenge in this case. So this is an open challenge where any startups can apply. There's a selection process. Actually, the selected startups were announced just a week ago, I believe. Mm-hmm. And now we go through the process of actually working with the challenge owner inside the city government, in this case now virtually, for about 4 months. And at the end of that 4-month period, if their solution is sufficiently developed, then the city government becomes the launching customer. So it's a very concrete way of how the city government is trying to really facilitate and make it possible for startups to do work for the city government. And this is important because so many cities say they want to be startup cities, but in many cases it just remains a sort of branding or marketing slogan. To be a startup city, then you should also actually facilitate or actually work with these startups yourself. And a big part of this program has been about, again, rethinking the procurement process, because that's a main barrier that makes it very difficult for startups to do work for the city government. Quite often, unless you're a big company with a big legal department, you can't even meet the requirements of the procurement process to have a chance to do work for the city government. And what's really nice about it, again, is the fact that it's actually scaled. So we talk about not being very good at scaling in Amsterdam quite often, but this is an example of a program that's been very successful, and now it's actually being used by different ministries, also different provinces, and also other cities in the Netherlands. So you can see, for example, other challenges by these different governments. And you can also find, maybe that's the last thing that I should mention, in Amsterdam, where the program started, there's also now, especially last year, there was a big sort of evaluation and impact assessment of what have we learned and what have we achieved from the last 5 years almost of working in this way. And a big focus has really been about changing the mentality of the city, of civil servants. Actually kind of getting civil servants to be able to work in a different way. Bringing these two worlds together, the government and the startups, is really quite a challenge, because they work in very different ways. So it's been a really big learning process, let's say. And that's also partially what's documented in that impact report.
Indeed, I think this, at the end of the day, the hardest technology that we have to change are the algorithms and softwares that are operating in our minds, because these are the ones that usually come into in our direction. And I think what I love from this principle is that at the end of the day, to be part of this movement of creating a smart city, you don't have to be a tech person. This is not only for tech geeks. It's not just resorted just to people that work in technology. This is something where everybody can join in. And at the end of the day, it's also about creating the ecosystem that can allow most of these ideas to flourish. Because I think one of the main restrictions or the main fears is around the subject of failure, right? Like, okay, I create a project, but is it going to work? And at the end of the day, there is no guarantee that whenever you start a project, it will fulfill its purpose. There might be some more important lessons along the way, but at the end of the day, even if a project doesn't reach its goal or it's not scalable, the beauty is that there is a community that is much more connected, and I believe that's the end goal at the end of the day, right?
The learning is certainly part of it. So that's also one of the, let's say, core values of Amsterdam Smart City is learning by doing. And certainly when you talk about innovation, and partially our mandate, but also the mandate of some of our partners, is really to experiment. And then we do have this awareness that, okay, a lot of experiments are not going to be successful, but the value is indeed in learning along the way. And even when some of these pilots fail, they do lead to other projects or to other initiatives or other collaborations. So in that sense, that's the idea behind moving this ecosystem forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I wanted to take the opportunity to ask this question because it's a great study case. I'm wondering if there has been a push in this direction, if there are some projects, but also you can comment rather on your thoughts. So one of the things that happened recently here in Romania is that the closed markets have to be closed because of the number of COVID cases, and so there was a big backlash that local administration received in Cluj. And because now this is the harvest season, so most farmers are now left with a lot of produce and not a place to properly share them. So Marcel, who is listening to us, he's coming from an e-commerce perspective. He works in the sector. He finds it absurd that there isn't an easy open source platform and best practice on how to create a digital grocery platform. And this is indeed an example of how, if there were an open source solution in one city, this could be quickly implemented across the board. Do you know of any examples of initiatives like this in the Netherlands during the COVID situation that can be shown as examples?
Well, one thing that the starting point in this case, before we get to the tech part, I think there should be an effort to keep open air markets open. And that's actually been the priority within Amsterdam, but also other cities, is to make sure that the street markets stay open.
Yeah.
So I think, also as an overarching statement, use the right technology when appropriate. So there can also be non-tech solutions, keeping markets open in this sense. And indeed, this question of platforms for really being able to connect producers to consumers, I would have to maybe follow up on that question, or if he sends me an email, then I can connect him to other parties in the ecosystem that are much more focused on the food and logistics topic. It's not per se my focus area, but I do think there are some examples from the ecosystem. Picnic is a company that does home deliveries, and I think a lot of the supermarkets by now also do a lot of home deliveries as well. So there are some examples of solutions, but off the top of my head, to really answer his question, I would have to follow up.
Well, I hope he'll drop you an email or find you on LinkedIn on the subject. Because at the end of the day, right, the real challenge comes when we are met with unprecedented problems, like in this case with the COVID-19 pandemic. It has put a lot of us out of our comfort zone, and we had to rethink a lot of things. And one of the main challenges is the fact that you can see the difference between communities that are very well connected, that quickly adapt because they know who is affected, and they can easily put resources in the same place, and cities where there isn't a history of collaboration, or certain stakeholders have kind of been left each doing their thing, and now all of a sudden they're like, okay, so how do we collaborate? And there's a lot of emotions that sometimes can get stuck in. And right now we do have the incentive because of the problem to work together, but I think this is an important idea, that this is why the collaboration has to happen. This is the first ingredient, I believe, to a concept like smart city, because if there is no prior relationship that people can build upon, knowing that, okay, we've worked together, we've experienced things before, then it's very hard to start from scratch, especially in a moment when, okay, decisive action is necessary and there's a lot more at stake.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you said it really well. And also I like what you mentioned earlier about the kind of the algorithms of the mindset. Mm-hmm. So that's actually also something, even after 10 years of working on this, we still have as a program this kind of conviction that ultimately our role is just to facilitate that people within this ecosystem have the experience working together in order to build that trust, actually. So and again, it doesn't happen overnight, like you said. So that is indeed a challenge for places that are polarized or don't have that culture to start with that. It really ultimately starts with kind of this mindset, and also what Biden said in his speech a few days ago. It's a choice if you don't want to collaborate, and it's also a choice if you decide to collaborate. So you do have to basically start, and it doesn't happen automatically, but it is possible.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. If let's say people that are tuning in, maybe we have people in local administration or startups or someone who is really passionate about the subject, and maybe they have an idea, they have a project. What would you recommend if they want to, ask for some advice from you guys? Who should they contact? Where should they go?
Yeah, so AmsterdamSmartCity.com is this international platform where they can certainly get a lot of inspiration, and also start connecting to the people developing projects that could be relevant. I think what I see quite often when I talk to people in Romania about the smart city is indeed this intuition to always focus on the high tech element. Mm-hmm. And I can understand where that's coming from, because it's not only in Romania that's the case. That is ultimately the smart city concept is a concept that was invented by Cisco and IBM and the tech companies. So this technology push approach to smart cities, where you have maybe the government and one or two big corporates in the room, is actually, let's say, the default or the usual approach to a smart city program. But I think from what I've seen, what Romanian cities need in many cases is much more like the spatial, non-smart approach. And that's also partially, I say that because I come from this field that's much more focused on urban planning. And then in that discussion, bicycle lanes or dedicated bus lanes will get you much further than a high-tech ICT system for integrated traffic lights, for example. And not that you can't use the technology, because the technology can certainly help in many cases, but a lot of the low-hanging fruit comes from spatial solutions. Mm-hmm. So again, if we talk about sustainable mobility, or if we talk about facilitating that these small producers can actually get their produce to markets, I think you can do a lot from without necessarily looking for that flashy silver high-tech solution.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Indeed. Well, I think I'm drawing some very important conclusions from the discussion of today. That, first and foremost, the like I said, the theme that I've picked up, and I believe hopefully everybody has understood, is that it starts with the ecosystem, it starts with the community of people, and the collaboration. That is the main ingredient necessary. Then you can add the technology, just like with the Powerpuff Girls. You put in some spice and everything nice, but the chemical X at the end of the day is collaboration, bringing stakeholders together and trying things out and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and just keep continuing going. Opening the system, involving stakeholders. So this is not something that local administration has to do on its own. In fact, this is not just for cities. It's a concept that applies for regions, for ministries as well, that they can easily open up challenges. They can find ways to engage with the community. And rather than always doing things by themselves, they can involve the great minds that are present in the community. And last but not least, that the toughest technology that we have to change is in the mindsets that we all work with, and it's an ongoing process. And I hope that at the end of this discussion, the people that have tuned in have found some glitter in their eyes or in their minds regarding what initiatives they could do. So please, everyone who has tuned in, check out Amsterdam Smart City. Check out the other projects like Startup in Residence. We're gonna leave some links in the comments so that you can check them out on your own. Cornelia, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to have this conversation. And if you have any final messages or final thoughts that you'd like to share to the people listening, I would love to give you the floor.
Well, I really like the way you summarized it, actually. And I think, ultimately my message, I think, is to try and shift from this power over to a power to kind of approach. So exactly what you said is embrace this kind of bottom-up, decentralized approach, and you will be really, I think, positively impressed with how much resilience and how many resources there are from the ecosystem. But ultimately, the ecosystem doesn't just happen on its own either. So you do need to have that party that facilitates and builds that ecosystem. I would love to see this approach also picked up by more Romanian cities. So I look forward to seeing how things develop now after the elections in the upcoming months and years.
Definitely. And we look forward to having you back. We had the chance to have you as a speaker at one event in Cluj. And we would love that once we would get back to having face-to-face events, to have you back here and to bring the community of urbanizers together.
For sure.
Everyone,
and
once
online,
again.
The online format, it works pretty well also, huh?
True. Indeed. A big thank you again to everybody tuning in, and stay tuned for this week. This week is very much about innovation. On Thursday, we're going to have our next podcast, and we're going to talk about very much the idea of creating a startup space and startup community to create more innovation in your city. And we're going to have an input from Eindhoven this time. So tune in on Thursday.
Thanks.